I think I found Oakhurst 42 years ago. So, and was ordained there 33 years ago. Married there. My kids grew up there. They were baptized there. Was ordained by them there. Great place. A great place to feel birthed from and sent out into the world. I've been in Cleveland since 2007, where I came to the Cleveland Clinic as the director of CPE program, and then later in 2013 became director of the whole program. And so I was telling Malou in my report, and then more after we talked, that one of the best things I did for myself over the last few years was take this course in cognitively based compassion training that Emory offers through their Center for Compassion and Compassion-Based Ethics and something science. It's a long name. But anyway, it's Emory University's program with the Dalai Lama that they've had for many, many, many years. And the CBCT in particular is a kind of meditation training that really includes, it's really brain training. It's more than what I think of when I think of meditation. So it comes out of the Tibetan traditions that many forms of meditation are come from and are being taught these days and sort of westernized. This is one of the ones that has been kind of, I wouldn't say it's been rinsed free of the Buddhism, but it's definitely not just for Buddhists, and it's definitely not trying to turn you into a Buddhist. So, but it is the meditation practices that have been handed down for millennia, really, and using those practices of both for sort of the traditional things that we think of for meditation, so relaxation, clearing your mind, calming your body, all those things, but all that for the purpose of retraining your brain to think better, and more importantly, to think more compassionately. And so what I've loved about it is compassion becomes more of a cognitive practice. And it's helped me distinguish between empathy, which is what wears us out, by the way. So I do believe in empathy fatigue. So, I mean, I know the title of the talk is maybe a little bit provocative. It's meant to get a conversation going. And so it's not meant to say, you're right or you're wrong if you don't agree with my inflammatory statement. But it was more of a way to say, can we talk some about the difference between what compassion is in the spiritual sense and how it differs from caring, caregiving, empathy, all those things. And it certainly includes it, but there's some finessing to do. So a couple of things I wanted to do today was tell you a little bit about what CBCT is and very much encourage you to look it up online and think about signing up for it, because whether you have a meditation practice for many, many years, or you've never really had a structured meditation practice, either way, I wish I could give you a money back guarantee that you will not be sorry that you took this. My youngest son was at Emory Medical School and taking it at the time, and I got interested in it about 2017. And because he really liked it, and because our colleague, some of our ACPE colleague, Maureen Shelton at Emory, was a teacher of it, I found out more about it, and I really liked how it sounded. And it came about because a Tibetan monk from India had come to Emory in the late 90s, maybe, to do his PhD in comparative religions, and he had left monastic life. He was probably in his 30s because they joined monastic life really young, so he'd already been a monk for 20 years, but he left monastic life and came to the States. Anyway, he was, I think people were already kind of getting to know him on campus, and the campus had a rash of suicides in their first year of Emory undergrads. And a young woman in that class went to administration and said, you've got to do something. This is, give students something more to help us. We need more to help us. And they went to him. His name is Tenzin Negi, Lobsang Tenzin Negi. And they went to him and said, I think he was still working on his PhD at the time. And they said, would you please help us learn some of your practices from your life as a Tibetan Buddhist monk that could possibly help our students? And so he with others, but primarily he, constructed this series of teachings that follow the teachings of there's so many different Buddhist traditions, and I'll get them wrong if I try to say which ones influence this process. But if you, almost anywhere you dip into mindfulness training, you're going to hear similar themes. So they broke it out into different segments, and I like that. It might have something to do with my Baptist roots. I like lessons, and I like them to be in order. I like Sunday school lessons. I don't anymore, but I used to. So it's divided up into 8 pretty distinct sections. The number of sections is not magical. It's just a convenient division, and they loop back around on each other. So they're very much in a certain sequence for a reason, and then they loop back around. And any one of them is a freestanding practice of its own, and probably takes a lifetime to master. But what they do is they start with what they call the nurturing moment, which is a way of getting yourself sort of reconnected to memories and sensate experiences of those memories that help us feel calm and safe and protected. And that's why they call it the nurturing moment. And this helps put us physically and emotionally and spiritually, I would add, in a place of receptivity. It gets our parasympathetic nervous system calmed down, and we get ready to receive something. So it's the beginning of sort of calming down, for lack of a better word. Then you move to stabilizing our attention. So that's the sort of traditional focus on the breath, try not to get distracted. Some of those traditional things that a lot of people, including me, think, I can't do that. I probably have undiagnosed ADD. I've always had a hard time sitting still, being still, quieting my mind, all that, which makes you and me the perfect candidate for this kind of training, because we're basically not going after simply clearing our thoughts out and calming down. That's not the end point by any means. It's a part of it, but it's really kind of preparing. It's really kind of wiping the kitchen counter clean is what it is, and then getting ready to make a meal, instead of just, oh, now my kitchen counter's clean, yay for me, which is also kind of fun. Yeah, I also really like a clean kitchen counter, and I don't actually want to mess it up with cooking, but that's beside the point. I'm derailing myself. So then you move into the self-compassion part of it. And it's really interesting because self-compassion used to be one of the 6 modules. And then pretty soon, after teaching this for years, they realized that there was something about Western culture, or Americans in particular, I don't know, they just started noticing the self-compassion piece. People really didn't get it, and they really wanted to speed past it, and they really wanted to get on to the part where they were compassionate about everybody else. And what they just kind of kept coming up against was, people don't get this. They don't understand what self-compassion is, and it's hard. And they don't really want to do it because we're sort of wired not to do it, especially those of us from a lot of us here are from the Southern Baptist tradition. I don't even know, maybe the majority of us are. And so a lot of works righteousness, in spite of other things that we might have heard. What I saw enacted was much more works righteousness and doing much more than being. So they ended up adding a second layer, self-compassion, and then they've expanded even further. So there's now 8 segments instead of 6, but 2 of the 8 are now self-compassion. It's sort of like we have to really stop in the middle and try to dig down on self-compassion before we can start branching out into compassion for the people around us. And then it works out in widening circles. You start with your own, people you know and love, you move to strangers, you move to people that are difficult, and then you move out to appreciating how interconnected we are with everyone, in spite of whether we'll ever meet them or not. And then finally is the sort of open-ended, open-hearted, total compassion, which of course is the goal, but I don't know who gets there, because then you start over again. I mean, it's not like you get there. And you practice training your brain to think differently about all kinds of things that have maybe been problematic. So as I said, I signed on in 2017 to really help me with my own stress levels as a director of a very the organization that I work for is very large, very complicated, very secular, very money driven, and very not so spiritual. I'm trying to think of a nice word for it. In 15 years of being here, we've made a lot of progress. I and my little bitty team have put spiritual care on the map here. People now know what it is, and they call and they ask for our help. And the pandemic actually helped. I hate to say it, but it gave chaplains a lot more visibility. I mean, all of you know this. People, New York Times, Washington Post, people that never thought about us were writing stories about us. The Atlantic, for heaven's sake, the New Yorker, like I almost had a heart attack and died because I used to live in New York. I've been reading the New Yorker for 40 years. I was like, what? I mean, that was almost too much. I almost couldn't take it. But so we're I think, you know, it's people know what we are, who we are now and what we do. Anyway, it was getting more and more stressful for other reasons. And I just did this for my own well-being. And what I found quickly was, and I'll get to this point and then I want to hear from you all. When I realized, oh my gosh, I had no idea what self-compassion really was. Oh my goodness, now we're going to steal the show. Let her talk. Let her take over. Adorable. I didn't know what self-compassion was. And I thought I did because I thought I had self-care down pretty well. I've been preaching that and thinking that and working on that and writing about it for, I don't know, a couple of decades maybe. And I thought, yeah, I do self-care. I'm real big about self-care. And I thought I had it. And I kind of thought that's what self-compassion was, and it is not. And the other thing is self-esteem. It has nothing to do with self-esteem. And in some ways, I was telling Milou earlier, and she already knew, I didn't have to tell her, I have not suffered from a lack of self-esteem. I have had more than was really accurate or necessary. More than was justified or necessary. So self-esteem is a joke, for one thing. I mean, it's not. We need self-esteem. But too much is ridiculous and gets us into trouble. And self-care has a similar kind of danger zone, and that is at least the way self-care is taught in this culture, and especially here at the Cleveland Clinic, who I still work for, by the way. I'm not the director anymore, but I am the senior educator of ACPE, and I'm still here, and I love that. And I'm using that office today, and I hope they don't fire me because I'm still griping about how how addicted it is really to stress. But most healthcare is, and most systems are, and it's not unique, I know, to the Cleveland Clinic. So anyway, I really have been surprised about that and surprised at how hard it is to be self-compassionate. And so the long and the shorter version is that over the last few years, with some health issues and some stress levels sort of that became unbearable, and my own sort of inner work and understanding what compassion is, I am now not working full time, even though I'm not retirement age yet. And I was I didn't have any models for stepping down from, this is a dream job. I mean, it's a fabulous place to work. In spite of all my griping, it's a fabulous institution. And it's been a great, great job. And so to walk away from that before my retirement age, I didn't have a roadmap for it. I'd never seen anybody do it. I kept calling it the Seinfeld. I was going to do the Seinfeld, like quit while you're ahead and don't wait till you get, either get fired or just bomb or whatever. So I just didn't have a model for it, but I knew that I needed to do it. And if I had not learned what real self-compassion was, honestly, from going through CBCT and becoming a teacher and staying in that community and staying in that dialogue and in that process and hanging on until I got what is it really, I would not ever have been able to let myself do what I'm now doing, which is feeling a lot better and contributing the parts that I love and letting someone else contribute some things that they love that we need that I don't want to do anymore. So Let me stop and see, like, what are your thoughts about this? What are your questions? And what are your hopes for today? We're a small enough group that you can really say, kind of, what would you, if you know, we're not going to go around the room and I'm not going to call names, but please do just speak up and tell me what do you want to talk about today? And if you want to, let's fight back about compassion. It does too, fatigue. My point has been that it's not compassion that wears us out. So when somebody tells me there's compassion fatigue, I'm like, there's fatigue. Don't get me wrong. There's loads of fatigue. My team has it. I have it. Healthcare has it. I mean, come on. The pandemic, of course, there's fatigue. And there's lots of fatigue. There's lots of, what does Paul say? Don't be weary in well-doing. There's lots of weariness from well-doing. So I get that. But what I always say back is, yeah, but are you tired because you have been too kind to yourself? Is that why you're worn out? Are you worn out because you've experienced too much compassion? Probably not. So compassion is not the villain here. Compassion is not what's tiring us out. It's something else. So that's my only point for the inflammatory talk title. Let me hear from some of you and hear what you want to hear about today and talk about today. I don't do PowerPoint. If you wanted a PowerPoint, you might as well just sign off now. I hate PowerPoint. I won't do it. So, but I will stick to the point.
I also gave people the opportunity to put it in the chat. So Tammy in the chat says that she's intrigued. I'm assuming that you use she, her pronouns. But Tammy says she's intrigued that self-care and self-compassion are not the same. Can you talk more about that?
Sure, thank you. I think that they do overlap considerably. I think that if you have, I think you can do self-compassion. I don't think you can have self-compassion and not do self-care. But I do think you can do self-care and not have self-compassion. And the reason they started to separate out for me was I realized, especially in a place like this, and probably everywhere that all of you work, self-care tends to be for the purpose of getting back in the game, right? Aren't you supposed to go rest and refresh and so you can go back and do more than you were doing before you crapped out? Excuse my language. So that's where I realized, wait a second, what if I don't want to get back in the game? Or what if I want to play a different game? Or what if I want to be the water girl for a while instead of the, and self-care was allowing, self-compassion was allowing me to say, wait a second, self-care was really just patching me up and getting me back to the same level of stress and work. I won't even say productivity. I'm not even sure it was getting me anywhere. But just what felt so urgent and felt had to be done and felt, so that's the main difference. You can do self-care without self-compassion, but you can't do self-compassion without self-care. Not sure how. That's my simplest way of saying it. And they do look a lot, they can look a lot alike. Go ahead.
Amy, hi, Matt Norvell from Baltimore. Good to see you again.
Yes.
I've a lot of people want to argue that the enemy is empathy.
Yeah.
Right, that it's empathy fatigue and not compassion fatigue. Like empathy that gets stuck in a cycle and doesn't go anywhere almost.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure I have a clear question on it, but I was really interested by the awareness of we stink at self-compassion so much.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just makes me wonder, like, do we think that it looks like something else? Do we have a bad example of like, self-compassion is really feeling sorry for myself, or really is pitying myself?
That's right. Yeah.
And we get stuck there and it doesn't go anywhere productive.
That's correct. That's the biggest resistance. I'm glad you said that, because empathy obviously is a good thing. Like empathy is that feeling of I see your suffering and now I feel that pain. I feel it. And I feel my own pain resonating with your pain. I mean, empathy is our stock in trade as chaplains. We wouldn't want to be without it. But empathy overload is when we don't, and we know this from our training, that we, in ministry training, chaplaincy training, whatever other job CPE folks, trained folks, kinds of work they do. We know how to try to not separate out, but understand our own emotional reactivity enough to keep it in its own place so that we get in the patient's shoes or whomever, but we get back out and get back in our own shoes and try to be of help. Empathic overload is when we find it harder and harder and harder to get out of the patient's shoes or the figuratively get out of the bed or get out of the situation that they're in. And we get overly identified with their emotions. And we have lots of techniques about this, but I think it's really interesting that if we go to compassion, if we see compassion as the part where we shift and use more of our brain, keep the emotional information, and I'm not sure it's not in our brains, I don't know where it is, but keep more of the emotional information, but use our thinking ability to will that this person's suffering end. And it's not always that we can be the ones to stop it. I mean, the interesting thing about it is compassion has that cognitive action component. I see your suffering and I really want to see it end. And I say it that way because I don't necessarily say I see your suffering and I really want to help, because the I really wanting to help can add to the empathic overload. It's more emotional ingredients in the stew. This is not the way CBC teachers talk about it. So you're better off taking the whole course with them. But it feels connected to me to talk about it that way. I do think we do think that I think it's largely because of our upbringing in Christianity, Protestantism, of being taught that it will be selfish if we take care of ourselves. We talk about, remember, I mean, how many of you grew up with Jesus first, yourself, how is it? Others second and yourself last. And that is joy. Did we all grow up with that bullshit? I mean, sorry, but it's just crap. It is crap, but it's really hard to get it out of our brains. We still kind of do believe it. And even people who think they're teaching us to be more kind to ourselves, we still say, but I don't need to have a pity party. Well, that's not very self-compassionate. If you're going to call it a pity party, you've already told me that you don't think you already diminished it. Mm-hmm. If you're treating your own feelings like that.
Mary's got her hand up.
Yes, go for it. Somebody flag me. Yeah, Mary.
Hi. So I apologize that right as this started, my kid's pediatrician called back. So I wound up taking a call right at the very beginning. So you may have already said this, but I guess I'm kind of out spirituality, and I'm writing papers for boards right now. So I feel like I'm constantly trying to nail Jello to the wall. But can you define self-compassion? Because I feel like you spent time saying what it isn't.
What it isn't. Good.
What is it?
You're right. Really good point. And no, you did not miss that. The best that I can say it is when we are as kind, when we learn to truly be as kind to ourselves as we are most of the time and as we aspire to be to others. So just what Matt said, if I come in Matt's office and I say, oh my God, Matt, I had this kind of day and that kind of day, he's going to be kind and he's going to listen to me. He's not going to say, oh, Amy, get over yourself. Stop having a pity party. You had a fine day. Think of what someone else went through today. And what about this? And what about that? And those are all things we do to ourselves. It's really easy to do. It's easy to say, I'm going through this, but at least it's not that. And at least that's not as hard as what so-and-so is going through. Some of that is perspective taking, and that's okay. It's important that I recognize my bad day is not the same thing as the tragedy in Ukraine. Like, that is true. And that's really important perspective taking. But that's different from saying, I don't have the right to say, I had a really bad day. And that I would say to myself, and I'll tell you how I really got it. So as God would have it, I happened to push myself to the point of collapse. Don't panic, I'm fine. But I collapsed on a hotel room floor in 2018. And I honestly didn't think anything about it because I got right back up and went about what I was doing. And I almost didn't mention it to anyone. Robin Booth is my old friend, and he probably is not surprised to learn that I didn't just didn't think to mention it. So I did mention it to my best friend at work who happens to be a doctor. And she said, you can't just collapse on the bathroom floor. You have to go see your doctor, who is another friend of ours. So I went to my doctor and she said, no. And she put me through a bunch of tests and they found out that I have something called POTS, which now a whole bunch of people are finding out about because COVID is giving people POTS. Well, it turns out I've always had it. I didn't know I had it. I've been just kind of powering through and doing my self-care so I could power through again. And what it required of me, I mean, it's kind of karma actually, because I'm just the kind of jerk that would have said, yeah, that doesn't sound like a real thing. It's one of those amorphous things that's a blood pressure irregularity and a wiring, and it's neurological, your timing is off and it's just a weird little autonomic thing. And I would have been like, yeah, I don't think that's a real thing. But God, in God's great wisdom, got me diagnosed at the #1 heart hospital in the world. And it's a cardiac test that definitively finds it. And I passed it with flying colors. So I basically had literally nowhere in the universe to go for a second opinion. I have it. So I had to face that I had it. And I had to be kinder to myself about the ways my body can't do some things that I was keeping on making it try to do. And so one of the things that you do when you have this condition is you have to exercise harder. And I don't love that. I exercise, but I don't like doing it harder. So I'm out doing it and I'm feeling terrible. And rather than saying to myself, okay, don't forget, you have this very real condition. There's a reason why you feel terrible. Sit down for a minute and rest and you'll be fine. What I would have done to myself through my whole 60 some years was say, oh, come on, don't be such a baby. You hardly run at all. You're not even fast. Like, keep going. You're being a baby. This made me switch. And it happened one afternoon. I'm out doing my cardiac rehab and I just thought, God, I just don't have it in me. And I sat down on the curb and I started to cry. I was feeling very sorry for myself. And I almost said, don't be such a baby and have a pity party. And I caught myself and I realized, oh my God, this is it. And I channeled my best friend, the doc. I saw her, who walks with me frequently, standing right beside me. And she said, don't talk to my friend that way. She'll get up when she feels like it. You leave her alone. And she was scolding me for treating myself that badly. And it was so powerful because I felt that's what we want, isn't it? We want that friend who comes along and says, hey, leave him alone. He's doing fine. Give him a minute, just give him a minute. I mean, that's what we do for people all day long, but we don't do it for ourselves. It's so hard to do it for ourselves. It's such a wired in impulse. I have not really met anybody, honestly. I mean, I've been on a tear talking about this, and I have not met that many people who really get it, who don't give themselves some crap when they just don't feel like they can take another step, or when they do feel the fatigue and exhaustion and overwhelm, we give ourselves crap about it. So I'm not paying attention who's raising their hands. I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, it's a long answer, but I think there's a lot more to it. But self-compassion in a nutshell for me, can I speak as kindly and supportively to myself as I do to other people that I know are not, they're not just when they need it and when I need it. Like, forget who deserves it, who doesn't. It's like, when I need it, can I do that?
Yeah, this Chad Hawkins from Houston. Hello,
Hi.
everyone.
Hi.
If this is helpful, Kristen Neff has written extensively on self-compassion.
Yes.
And she's got a section in her book that I try to read regularly. It's a little wordy, but stick with me. She says self-compassion versus self-esteem. Yes. Rather than trying to define our self-worth with judgments and evaluations, what if our positive feelings toward ourselves came from a totally different source? What if they came from our hearts rather than our minds? Mm-hmm. Self-compassion does not try to capture and define the worth or essence of who we are. It is not a thought or a label or a judgment or an evaluation. Instead, self-compassion is a way of relating to the mystery of who we are.
Yeah.
Rather than managing our self-image so that it is always palatable,
Yes.
self-compassion honors the fact that all human beings have both strengths and weaknesses. Rather than getting lost in thoughts of being good or bad, we become mindful of our present moment experience, realizing it is ever-changing and impermanent. Our successes and our failures come and go. They neither define us nor do they determine our worthiness. They are merely part of the process of being alive. Our minds may try to convince us otherwise, but our hearts know that our true value lies in the core experience of being a conscious being who feels and perceives.
Absolutely. She's fantastic. And definitely look her up and read everything she's ever written.
It's
And
page 152 if you get the book. Yeah.
Well, and by way of confession, when I first heard her talk about self-compassion, I just blew her off. I was so, and I did not know that my resistance to self-compassion was so deep that the only defense I had against what she was saying was to blow her off and think, oh yeah, whatever. Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, N as in Nancy, E. Yeah, you might want to put it in the chat bar. She's amazing, and she has probably done the most in terms of researching self-compassion, and has a great TED talk on the difference between self-compassion and self-esteem. Yep, there's nothing wrong with you. Yeah. And it is about, people do kind of resist this because they say, well, is it just about letting myself off the hook for everything and not having any standard? And it's like, no, it's not that. It's that we all have these imperfections and weaknesses, and we're all human, and it's accepting that with the same level of grace, if you will, that we say we're using on other people. We say that all the time. We say, oh, well, I can let other people, blah, 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 but not me. Well, that's interesting. Why are you so special that you don't even need rest or, downtime? And not just in the interest of returning stronger. I'm on a real tear about coming back stronger. It's just driving me nuts. I'm like, forget being stronger. Forget coming back stronger. Just come back. Other comments and questions? I'd much rather discuss this.
Amy?
Yeah.
Amy, this is Tammy Higdon. I was the one that asked you to talk about the difference between self-care and self-compassion. You gave me a brand new lens to think about a recent experience for me. I've been a chaplain for almost 35 years, and I've recently retired in January. And I've been great at practicing self-care.
Yeah.
And yet at 62 years old, I felt like the self-compassionate thing to do for myself was to retire.
Yes.
So I was still on top of my game. In some ways, I felt like, I don't think I was burnt out, but it is fascinating. And that's helped me kind of see the difference between the two, because I think we treat self-care sometimes as just another duty to stay.
That's right.
Stay in the game. And I had so many people, and I know part of it was their grief that they didn't want me to leave.
Yeah.
Who would say things like, why are you retiring so early? And I was outside, I would say, well, I'm 62. That's not really early. And secondly, though, inside, I would feel this twinge of guilt, like, oh, am I not being good to my profession?
That's right.
Because I'm leaving now.
Yes.
But the reality is, I've stepped out, and I listened to you talk about you not working full time and what you kind of felt about, but I'm not old enough not.
Yep.
Know what God may have next for me to do now that I have practiced self-compassion.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Tammy. That's great. I mean, we're right here.
Yeah.
The same thing. And I got there back, the other way. Like, I couldn't have even let myself think about cutting back.
Yeah.
Had I not figured out, oh my gosh, I did not know about this. And it's kind of embarrassing because I spent a lot of years like blah, 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 about self-care, and I thought I got it. I really didn't.
Yeah. I see the difference now. So
thank you. I love that. And congratulations.
Thank you.
On a self-compassionate thing to do. Good for you. And I know a lot of folks, like people say, well, you're lucky you can cut back, or you can. I know that. I know that. I got
Yeah.
That's different from, do I really need to keep going at the same pitch that I was going, or am I just afraid to let myself? And then, like I said, the physical stuff that got revealed, it was nothing new. It was something, something I've always had, and makes a lot of things in the past make a lot more sense. But to just give I mean, sort of like, oh, I have a doctor's note now, I can slow down a little bit. But it's like, even if I hadn't been able to do that, would I have allowed myself to say, I will flourish more if I will not keep driving myself at the same pitch and rate that I've been doing.
Yeah, that's kind of the distinction between self-care and self-compassion has been something that has really interested me in the last few years in working with residents, especially I've been doing a lot of education for myself and my students around trauma. And so much of that is about self-care. But what I'm seeing in that is it's not like the self-care of like, a lot of my students think it's a checkbox where, right. I encourage them to be, be kind to themselves and care for themselves. And if they don't, check off that, but well, I didn't go bowling and go walk out in nature and do those things that I know that you think are great. And I'm like, it's just a check off box. Then that's, and it's
more to do.
It needs to work for you. And it's more about, to me, like kind of realizing this state of being, like we're limited and and to be curious about the things that we don't like about ourselves and that we judge about ourselves. And, in studying the Enneagram, like if you see twos, what the different ones, but a lot of times caregivers who judge themselves for needing something themselves, and that's why they are caring for other people. And stop and say, I need time, I need space, would be something they can't even say to themselves, let alone think about doing for themselves. So for me, it's like how to reframe the whole conversation from like this checkbox that you need to do so you can say you took care of yourself to, who am I, and what are the things that really nourish me, and what are the things that deplete me, and how am I engaging those things that nourish me to be kind to myself. That's kind of, to me, the struggle I see. It's with trying to differentiate those things,
it's super hard. I thank you, Suzanne, because it's very hard to learn how to be that kind to ourselves. I mean, like I said, I really don't know anybody who knows how to do it. And I got lucky because in that same original class happened to be this same best friend doctor. And so when we got to that part of the lesson of like, say it the way your best friend would say it to you. And it was like, we both were in tears because she's had a high powered position here, and she would come to my office and she'd be crying and, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And she'd start downing on herself about what she didn't do. And I'm like, oh my God, no, you can't do that. I'd be like, I would just give her the space to cry about stuff, but also say, wait a minute, don't talk to yourself that way. And so being able to, just ask yourself the next time you start doing self-talk, would you talk to the person you love the most this way?
Yeah.
And you probably wouldn't.
Yeah. So two things. So LeBray put in the chat, he put it just to me, but I asked him if I could read out loud. He said it's okay. He said, perhaps self-compassion requires us to be vulnerable and honest with our limitations, and that's uncomfortable for some people. I would say for many people, not just some. But yeah, as you can see, that was good. That's why I had to read it out loud.
That's exactly right, LeBray. And in fact, that's a very fundamental part of the teaching, that when you get to self-compassion, it's all about accepting our own limitations, vulnerabilities, and imperfections. We all have them, and we all have these adversities that are going to fall on us through no fault of our own. So we even blame ourselves for the tree that fell on our head. We should have looked up, or we should have moved out of the way. We find a way to blame ourselves for almost everything. And some of that is to give us some sense of control, to just make us calm down a little bit, to think that we're in control. But some of it is just, we don't know how to accept that stuff just happens. Mm-hmm. And you're exactly right. It does make us very vulnerable. And that's part of why it's a big part of why we don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. That's exactly it.
And then the other thing is, I was wondering at some point, not necessarily right now, but can you could you give some tips, some pointers on like kind of help to maybe either help people start the process of having, I don't know, shift in their thought process, or to give maybe some pointers on self-compassion? I just know people will my folks love the takeaways. They're like, yes, this makes sense. Now, what do I do?
A 3-point sermon, here's your 3-point sermon. So I think if you journal, if you take notes, like try to this is where the cognitive and mindfulness part of it is really, really important, because you have to really pay attention to your thoughts. So when you find yourself thinking, like I said, I have something going on in my personal life that's very sad and very hard for me. And I tell close friends, and I am working through it, and I have a good cry, but I also know that it's not tragic. The people involved are all alive and well and healthy, and like it's not a tragedy. So that's my ability to say, but I still have the right to be really sad about it. And if I was talking to someone else who was telling me my story, I'd say, it's not a contest. I say that to people all the time. It's not a contest over who's got it harder. This is hard for you right now. Don't worry about how it's somebody else's. We'll get back to that. I mean, compassion is, we do want that. You think about the pebble falling in the pond and how the ripples go out. That's the way compassion works, and the way the training works. It's like the pebble will fall in the middle and it will ripple out. And that's sort of the goal, like that those ripples of compassion will just get wider and wider and wider. And they do. But the middle pebble is you. And that's what's so hard to believe. I spend some time thinking about it. I think, again, try to write things down, note it one way or the other, write it down, speak it to a friend, however you register things you want to remember. Do it that way. Write it on a sticky note, tattoo it on your forehead. I don't know what, but put it somewhere. When you catch yourself speaking, like just being a bad chaplain to yourself, just like if somebody else said that to another patient or another friend, you'd be like, well, that wasn't very nice or sensitive, or, hang on a second. I mean, it's so funny that we can hear it so loud and clear. Maybe that's why we hear it so loud and clear when other people do it. But when we say it to ourselves, we don't even know we're doing it. I mean, some of you may not fall into that camp, and God love you. Lucky you. Maybe you had, some of that is, I'm going to have to say, some of that is just a lot of luck that you didn't get that trained out of you. I've had to train it back in. And the good news is you can teach an old dog new tricks. And I am learning things in my 60s that I just didn't know. And it's embarrassing to say I'm this old and I did not know this. And you would think I would know this. But so what? Even that, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say I'm so old that I shouldn't know this. Not going to do it. I'm going to say it's always good to learn.
We got Mary's got a hand up.
Yeah.
So I wrote this in the chat, but I just wanted to, I highly, like 1,000,000% recommend Sherry Huber's book, There's Nothing Wrong with You. It is all about self-compassion. And I needed you to define it so that I could put the pieces together in my brain for that. But there's this part in here, the whole book, she is a Zen Buddhist who started a monastery in California. You can go on retreats there and she'll teach you exactly how to do the stuff, but it's written in like little kid font because she wants you to remember like your very first rejection, like when you first started hearing the negative voice inside. Wow. And it's all about, it's got all these scripts in it from like student to spiritual guide. And this part says, fake it till you make it. And it says, basically the student says, much of my reluctance to do certain aspects of the work ending self-hate comes from self-hate itself. Mm-hmm. I feel like if I say thank you to myself that I'm being phony. Right. And the guide says the voice that's telling you that it's phony is terrified that you'll find out how sincere you really are. And Then it talks about Saint Teresa of Avila, who said, you know, that you give and you love even when you don't feel it, you still do it. And the guide says that's because it's not phony. You're acting the way you really are, according to your true nature. And that gets beneath the self-hate.
Yes, that's wonderful.
This book is written in a way that children can understand. It's not like a huge academic read. It's got pictures in it. It's wonderful.
That's great. Thank you. That's good to know. More resources. And I think, you know, honestly, as a CPE educator, you know, I think you get the occasional person who's so narcissistic that they think there's nothing wrong with him. You know what I mean? Like, it's the other side of that phrase. There's nothing wrong with you, you know. Well, right. And there isn't. But there's always that tension of, well, if I come out thinking there's nothing wrong with me, well, I become that, you know, that narcissistic jerk who thinks there's nothing wrong with me. What's wrong with, you know, and that's not her message at all. I know that. But I think that those messages are that's what we're so afraid of. I think, and maybe I should just say me. That's what I was trained religiously and culturally to be so afraid of.
I think women are taught that more than anything. We are regularly taught not to be, you know, assertive, not to be confident, that we have to be demure. And when we take control and say, wait, there's nothing wrong with me, then there's this fear that everyone's going to be like, well, who does she think she is? Well, but men are kind of encouraged to be that way, but we're kind of beaten down.
And I agree. I think I certainly hear you, and I agree with a lot of that. I also think that there's a way in which everybody who's not, even the narcissist who's terribly wounded and thinks there's absolutely nothing wrong with him or her, that person is wounded, you know? And so the compassion training helps me go, oh yeah, they're wounded too. And they're talking really harshly to themselves. Like they're being so harsh that they can't even tolerate the idea that there might be something wrong with them, in the sense of there's nothing wrong with you, but we could buff you up a little bit, you know, we could shine up some of it a little bit, maybe. And we do a lot of that in CPE where we're like, okay, well, let's look at maybe what you didn't do so great. You know, so this fine line between not just saying, you know, it's sort of like that. Some of you are old enough to remember the Stuart Smalley, you know, character from Al Franken, you know, and he's like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. And there was sort of a lot of mockery of the self-help movements, and I think we're kind of, it's all kind of mixed in there. It's all kind of in the jumble of mixed messages. But I love that you brought that up, Mary, because it's really that fundamentally, I'm just like everybody else. That's what it's about. Like, yeah, stop talking. Yes, ma'am. Oh, she's waving at somebody. So, but
yes, I was giving Frank a little wave.
Oh, okay. That we're all imperfect. We're all going to be we're all vulnerable. We all come into this world as little babies, and we are all totally dependent when we come in. We're totally dependent when we're going out, and we're mostly dependent in between. And we have that in common with everybody. And so our dependency is not what's wrong with us. Our fear is not what's wrong with us. The problems that we have, we often help to create ourselves by wrong. To me, what I'm starting to feel is just inaccurate thinking. I won't even call it wrong, but just inaccurate. So I know we're getting close. Who would like to say something or ask something that hasn't had a chance? I'm not able to keep track of the chat bar, so I'm trusting.
Oh yeah, no other questions in the
Okay.
chat right now.
Their comments. Was there something you hoped for today that we would talk about that hasn't really come up, or any insights? I like insights and questions and takeaways. Hey, Cam.
No, thank you. It's really rich. Like, it's almost like, which of the many things do I want to ponder out loud? But so maybe one is maybe some clarity on this idea of kind of shifting from heart to mind for compassion.
Mm-hmm.
It's not uncommon for me in working with students, it's not like everything needs it, but it's not uncommon to notice that folks are getting kind of cognitive to shield themselves from how heartbreaking a particular situation is, especially when it's new, when it's
Yes.
new to be with a baby that's ill or
Yes.
that's died, and
Yeah.
notice so when I think of how often I might go, can you give yourself a break?
Yeah.
And literally move yourself down.
Yeah.
And notice what's happening. And that more often than not, I'll just see people more grounded, or just kind of get
Yes.
connected to their heart. And
Yeah.
it doesn't usually seem like it takes more energy. They just look like they found their way to the ground and they find themselves.
Mhm.
But that's an intentional shifting from head to heart.
Yeah.
And I hear you having an invitation that sometimes what's needed is to move from heart to mind. And I don't know, I was just inviting, how do those realities talk to each other, or ways to do, because they're meant to be in the service of wellness for the person.
Yes.
So
Great question. I guess what I would say is, and Robin wants to say something. Or are you just waving at somebody?
I do, because it's speaking to where I am kind of in my own process and growth this during this time. What I've realized is I can get into the feelings and all the negativeness of and my own self-hate. I live there. It is familiar to me. What I've had to do lately, and have been really working to do the work, is to that is a really loud voice in my head.
Yeah.
But there are other voices that are there as well that I have to turn the volume up on and turn this other volume down. And it is a very cognitive
Choice.
process of saying, wait,
Yes.
that's not the whole truth.
That's right.
What I'm feeling.
That's right.
There are other voices that are telling me something different.
That's right. That's right.
And maybe that happens when you're 60 years old. Or maybe hopefully it would happen for the rest of you.
I'm in my 40s. I'm doing a little bit of it.
That's good. You're ahead of the game. Well, and I wanted to respond to Cam too. And thank you, Robin. That's absolutely true. And Robin's one of the people in my life who taught me the most about joining my head to my heart. So I'm really happy to see you, my friend. And what I would say about that is, it finally occurred to me, I at least in CPE world have spent an overabundance of time thinking that emotion and thought is two separate things. And I don't think it is anymore. I mean, we do this head and heart thing. The Easterners don't talk about that. They don't talk about there being different parts of the body where feelings and thought. It's just this, we're one thing. And part of what I realized was I was giving too much. I was letting emotions have too much airtime. It's like, if there is a difference between thoughts and feelings, there's some distinctions. So, but if I was letting my feelings have all the airtime, things do get out of proportion. I can be very negative about myself, or about other people, about all kinds of things. There's sometimes my thoughts are wrong. I mean, I'm really grateful to my friends who are in recovery who talk about stinking thinking. In AA, they talk about stinking thinking. And I'm like, oh, I can do stinking thinking for sure. And so what I realized was emotions have a lot of information for us, but they don't have all the information for us. So if we give them all the airtime, we're just going to get caught in these loops. And I think that's where the self-hatred and the just the meanness. I would have never thought that you could say that I hated myself. I mean, oh, hell no, I love myself. I thought I just was like, no way. And then I realized, no, it's really the same thing. If I'm going to be mean to myself, kick myself when I'm down, that is self-hatred. That's the same thing. And so thinking clearly, oh my gosh, that is exactly what it is. Let me grab it when I think of it or do it and say, wait a second, would I say that to anybody else? Even somebody I don't like, I wouldn't be that mean to. Really, I don't think I would. So I think we've overemphasized. I do think we as a community of ACPE educators have overemphasized that when people start trying to do both, to think and feel at the same time, we're like, no. go to your feelings. And I think we've overemphasized the emotional side to the detriment of the cognitive. And it's been a relief to me to start balancing the two more and saying, you know, I can do both. And when I do think clearly, I'm actually kinder.
Hey, Amy, I wonder too, because you know, thinking about what you said at the very beginning about people getting too over-identified with the patient. And I think that's a real, I'm you know, see that sometimes too when a student's been through a lot of trauma. Yes. And they're really, you know, over involved with patients. Yep. But I wonder if the self-hatred could also look like self-neglect.
Oh, yes.
And what I mean there is they're not necessarily maybe not talking the self-hatred language, but they're just not examining themselves. They're not thinking about how tired they are or how worn out they are or how they're overextending themselves. And you know, I think that's another piece of that.
Yep.
Self-hatred.
And it absolutely is. And it's where that's where self-care and self-compassion really do overlap. Yeah. Like if there can be a real serious absence of either one. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, Robin.
Mine is so subtle that of how I discount myself and that I don't even recognize it.
Yeah.
And it's just, I've just started becoming much more aware of the subtle ways in which I discount who I am.
Yeah.
And then I was writing this morning and was saying, but so-and-so seems interested in me. And I was like, what? You know, yeah. He is interested in me.
Yeah. So. Yeah. No, it's really true. I hope this has helped. I mean, honestly, what I knew, this is just like a snapshot of something that's been going on for years that I feel like really has changed my life. I'm very, very grateful. The CBCT community has led me, you know, deeper into my own meditation practice. It's led me to Kristen Neff. It's led me to some of these other sources. There's a lot of good resources out there now. I think it's time, you know, I think there's a lot of us are really hungry for it. And because, you know, the fatigue is real, like that fatigue is real. And I never, ever meant to imply that it wasn't. I just don't want compassion getting the blame for it. I'm like trying to disconnect those two words because I think compassion does not deserve a bad rap. And if we are getting what we think is compassion fatigue, it might be that we're suffering from a self-compassion deficit, and that's adding to our fatigue. That's my sermon. Thank you all very much for joining me today. I really enjoyed seeing your faces and hearing your questions, and would love to see where it goes.
I think we actually said 90 minutes, but we can wrap up.
Oh, we did.
An hour.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think we said 90 in the.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, well, we can keep going.
It's for whatever we want to do. If we feel like we're wrapping up and it feels like naturally come into a close, then we can do that too. I'm sure people, you know, maybe they take the half an hour and do something kind.
Well, I apologize because I had put something down for 2:10, but I now don't have to do it. So I can stay on or not. And that's really kind of the gist of what I have anyway, because I thought about whether we would go through some of the actual practices, but I kind of feel like I don't know. It feels like looking at somebody's slideshow of a, you know, Paris instead of just going to Paris. It's not really going to give you much of a sense for what it's like.
I got you.
So
I personally would still really like to see the slideshow though of Paris.
Oh, would you?
I mean, not a literal slideshow. I know. I'm just saying, you know,
yeah.
I would like to know some of the practices.
Is there one practice you
can? Well, we can do one that I really love. So the whole thing starts with what they call the nurturing moment. And this is just, I mean, I'll never forget it because the first time I ever heard of it, it was just a great moment. So in this process, and every time you sit down with a CBCT teacher or community to practice, to do a meditation practice, they do it in sequence. So they will start with the nurturing moment. And so the more you practice this particular thing, the more the quicker it gets. So it's sort of like, you know, we all have our buzzwords. So, you know, whatever the expression signals, let's be here now kind of thing. And so, like I said, the point of the training is that we, as much as we can, we recall a time, a person, a place, a thing, a time when we felt really nurtured. So we felt cared for, protected, seen. I'm gonna use an example from my dear friend Robin Booth. I'm gonna out you about this because this was one of the sweetest moments of my life. I was a new CPE student at Georgia Baptist in Atlanta, and I came in with guns blazing. And Robin knew me a little bit from our church, but not much. And he said at one point, I really want to hear you, but I need you to turn the volume down a little bit. And it was the first time someone had said something to me other than, why don't you pipe down? I've heard that my whole life. I am an 8. I also learned in CPE. I have had a big mouth my whole life before I ever had the ability to even decide about it. And no one had ever blessed that I had something to say. They had just said, why don't you shut up? Why don't you either turn that thing off or change the channel? But nobody to that point had said, why? If you just turn down the volume a little bit, then I can hear what you're saying and I want to hear it.
It's beautiful.
There he is right there. So that was a nurturing moment for me. Like, wow, thank you. You want to hear me. Thank you. Wow. So you just take a few moments. We'll take a couple of minutes of silence. Try to recall some person. It could be a teacher. It could be a parent. It could be nature. It could be a religious figure. It doesn't have to be a interpersonal moment. A lot of people start this process and they go, oh, well, that made me think of my grandmother, but now my grandmother's gone and it makes me sad. Okay, this is where the cognitive part comes in. Because like, okay, well, we're going to consciously decide not to just think about how sad we are that Granny's gone. We're going to remember how good it felt to be loved by a Granny, which is why we miss her. So we're just going to return to the parts about loving, having this Granny love on us. That's what we're going to hold on to. And we're going to try to recall it in as much sensate detail as we can. We're going to try to remember smells, the feel of her apron or her arms or her, her cold hands on your forehead, whatever memories you have. And then you just sit in those memories for, you just soak yourself in these memories and see what happens. So we'll just do it for a couple of minutes. And I don't have my bells. I took them all home. This isn't my office anymore. So I'll just do a timer, but for about 2 minutes. I want you to close your eyes if you're comfortable, get in a comfortable position, breathe deeply, try to relax, turn your camera off if you need to. But for the next 2 minutes, just enter into a memory of nurturance in as much detail as you can. And I'll say it's time in 2 minutes. Okay, that was 2 minutes. That was a really short one. So, what was that like? And they don't all have to be that dramatic. I mean, that's a dramatic moment for me. I still remember that was 25 years ago or more.
It felt tender.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you feel your body start to relax?
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how much more relaxed I get when I consciously do that than when I just do my deep breathing or whatever. I just like remember who's been nice to you. It could be somebody who opened the door for you and held it and you don't even know who it is. I mean, it's just any kind, it can be a moment that was kind and unexpected. And what's it like for others?
Well, like you said, cognitively, I kept having to stop going places. Like I was fighting the whole time. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure it was all that relaxing. I think this takes practice. I mean, this is hard work in some way.
Yes.
Or another.
It is.
So a little frustrated, but I get the idea though.
Yeah, it's a good thing to try. I mean, it does take some work. It really does.
I could hear the soft voice of my, well, I call her bonus mother. She calls me a bonus daughter.
Nice.
I could just hear her soft voice and her playfulness. I was remembering a moment. It's where I had come out to her, and we had gone on a trip after that to Asheville. And I remember before I even revealed to her my sexual orientation, she had stopped me and said, well, I just want you to know anything you say is not going to change my love for you. So we're on this trip in Asheville, and we stopped by the bookstore there. I think it's Malaprops. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, and so, I'm thinking to myself, I had been over the different sections, and I didn't want to, I don't really want to peruse the gay and lesbian section after I just came out, and it's just a little bit too much. But I remember at some point she had walked over to me and she said, have you been over to the gay and lesbian section? It's just, they have some great materials over there. It's like, I'm like,
oh, we're going over there.
Yeah. So I remember saying to her in the car on the way back, I said, you're probably going to find my life partner before I do. You're probably going to be the person that introduces me to it. But it was such a kind.
Yes, that's it.
Kind moment.
I mean, she saw you for who you are, and she loved who you are. And that's, it's feeling seen in the best sense of the word, not exposed, but seen. Yeah.
Wes, were you?
Yeah, Wes, hey.
Yeah, I was going to say what someone else mentioned about it being work. It's very true. I noticed that as well. So I was thinking about being when I was a kid out in the woods across the street from my house, and I would go out there a lot and often alone, and it was just this wonderfully nurturing place. Always felt safe. I mean, there wasn't any other humans there watching me, so I may have been seen, but so I'm imagining, I'm going back with these memories, but my mind started thinking about, oh, is that something I did, or analyzing things and getting wrapped up in this instead of just
being in it,
experiencing the emotions I remember, and the sensations, like touching a tree trunk or hearing birds, because that's what brought me the comfort, or that's why the memories are so important.
Yes, that's a great example, Wes, and it's a really good one. That's why I said it can be in nature. It can be, a mystical experience with the divine. It can be a dream, or another human, or pet. Nobody loves us like our hungry pets.
Carol. Carol has her hand up.
Hey, I just wondered if anybody else had the same problem I did. As I was trying to think of nurturing, well, back up. I was not really nurtured to be accepted for who I am as a child. So I think I sought that for many, many, many years. And was I tried to think back to people who helped nurture that. Many of them crossed boundaries at the same time.
Yep.
Sexual, emotional. Very hard to sort through that.
Yes.
Mhm.
I just wondered if anybody else felt that way.
I'm really glad you said that, and I want to give people a chance to reply because it's a risky thing. I mean, every group that we start teaching this in, we say often the people who gave us care also made some mistakes. So it's often possible that these memories are going to have a mixed quality to them, and so it's part of the practice really to not to look for examples that don't have that ambiguous quality. So look for qualities. Robin Booth, great friend, great supervisor, still is someone I love and trust. So that's a completely unambiguous memory, you know, and I think those are probably better, at least, especially at first, because later in the modules, when we start expanding our circle of compassion out to reach people that are difficult for us, and sometimes it is people that have been quite close and have also hurt us, possibly even abused us. So it's not, there's no rule about, we don't have to go do hard stuff. I mean, this is about nurturing ourselves and healing ourselves so that it just comes when we feel ready for it. It comes when we feel safe enough for it. This is about feeling safe. So I don't know why it's not called a moment of safety, but I think maybe that's too much emphasis on fear and safety. I don't know. But the idea is that you're looking for a place that's pretty unambiguous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay. You might still, like if you pick an unambiguous one and they've died, you might miss them, or the relationship broke up and that's painful or whatever. But either way, you're going to go for the memory that's not so ambiguous. And then the more you do that, like, I think I like to sort of now collect nurturing moments. Like for a while, I just had these one or two really big ones and I just kept going back and back and back. And then I just realized nurturing moments are all around us all the time. And so I started just collecting more, you know, anytime someone says, "Hey chap, you really helped me today." That's a nurturing moment. I mean, none of us could keep going if nobody ever said that. We couldn't tolerate it.
Yeah, I appreciate what you just said about collecting them, because the first place I went was like way back to like little kid times with my grandfather, right?
Yeah.
Which is probably also like highly idealized at this point. Fine by me.
It may not be.
Oh yeah, but you know, I'm like, which is fine. However, the idea when you said like collecting them, then I was like, oh well. So the other day, as you guys see, I have a toddler at home, and the other day she has a doll baby that she calls her baby, and the baby's name is only Baby. We've tried. There's no other name, just Baby. Okay.
That's a good name.
Right. So Baby. All right. So I'm like, did you get your baby? And so instead of looking for the doll, she hugged my neck. And so I said, I look at her and she's got this, you know, she's like looking at me and she's hugging my, and I said, "I'm not your baby, my baby." I said, "Oh,
yes, you
I
are."
said, "Okay." Right. I said, "If that is being called your baby by someone who's not quite two, listen, that is, you know."
I'll take it.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I can take that moment. It doesn't have to be, you know.
I'll take it any day.
Huge one. Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah, and it's fun to collect them. And they actually do, I mean, it's sort of a superpower after a while. I mean, that's what the training is like. Like if you really train your brain to do this, you can get that oxytocin rush. You really can. You can produce it. I mean, they've proven this stuff physiologically. The more you practice, this is the whole mindfulness-based stress reduction stuff. You practice putting your body in a more relaxed and secure place. It's about feeling secure. Yeah. Oh, sorry you have to leave. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. But I do encourage you to sign up and take CBCT, because it's the practice, it's the repetition, Excuse me.
This is both a thank you and kind of two invitations or like takeaways I can feel kind of bubbling for me. So one from the practice, I like this is like both noticing around you where there's nurture, looking through my own history, and to imagine that even in relationships that have been lost, even if they're not an ongoing source of nurture now, that there could be moments, and the idea that those can be recollected without having to like do grief work I've already done. Okay. Or like, I don't know, somehow like the nurture and the grief got of lost relationships. So that feels like an invitation to go, well, what is it to go back and recollect the nurture pebbles, even among those relationships that were large, that needed to end, but that didn't mean there weren't places of nurture in them. So that's like an interesting weed and chaff kind of collection, but a tool for doing that. And the other one is, it's kind of lingered from the earlier conversation with you, Amy, which is just noticing, when does the heart need a break? Because the mind, and I don't mean to over separate it, but just when can you have an idea that's helpful and take a break? Though for myself, I would still really honor when it's time to take a break from the mind back to the heart. And maybe that's some of my own, like how many students are coming in from thinking about their faith so much and just have lost connection to their heart. So I'm just still, I feel myself like just wanting to hold the value of that without it turning into not noticing what else needs doing or what how to hold the bothness of that. So
I do too, and I must say you do that beautifully. I wasn't talking about not doing that.
So
yeah,
that was real. Yeah, so that's a thank you. That's an invitation to some ways of sitting and journaling even this weekend. And so
thank you. It's a relief for me. I mean, I do think there's a little bit of difference, and I think it is a relief sometimes to go from my thoughts to my feelings, and then to let my feelings take a break and go to my thoughts. But I just think they're probably a lot more interconnected than sometimes we think about it. Sometimes I've been taught to think about it. So, but I agree with you. I don't want to. That's the whole thing. It's the self-talk that we do that comes from more from our thinking brain that says, blah, 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 blah. And this is trying to retrain that same thinking brain to say something a little more helpful.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're working less, Amy. That's like I'm heartened for you, but somehow if that makes me heartened for me too. I don't know, but it's like that ripple,
I'm really
glad to hear for you, but it's a reminder.
Yes. And speaking of being hardwired, one of the hardest parts was feeling the financial responsibility of my husband gave up a great job to come with me, and his insurance is dependent on me, and blah, 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 blah. And just the fear of like, oh, will I have enough? And realizing I finally understand why the Bible says that it's harder for a rich person to get into, heaven than the camel. It's hard for a rich person to get into the kingdom of heaven. And I'm like, I always thought that was like, why? What's wrong with that? And I'm not super rich by any means. We all know chaplains and educators don't end up rich, but I'm very comfortable. And I get it. When we have money to trust, we trust it. So it's really hard not to. I trust this chair I'm sitting in right now. It's kind of hard not to trust it. It's what's holding me up. So we think it's real, that's what's holding us up. And we think we can't let go of that. I need the money. And truthfully, God Almighty, I wasn't going to live long enough for it to matter. So anyway, thanks for saying that. Just because I am really, this is the most self-compassionate, short of marrying my husband, who Robin knows and loves. Short of marrying him, this is the kindest thing I've ever done for myself.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I started talking and then a message popped up and I'm like, squirrel. Anyway, So I just wanted to say, Amy, I have really appreciated this time with you today. And I just want to say thank you so much. And I appreciated, it's not just Amy, let me just say, I appreciated all of you and the ways that you've shown up and jumped in and offered resources and, you know, all the good conversation. I feel like we created a nice intimate space here in the midst of Zoom world, which is nice to know we can still do this after 2 years of Zooming nonstop.
This was really great. I agree. And I just wanted to say, if enough of you wanted to do a more regular thing, I would be open to trying that. It wouldn't be the full-blown course, you know, but it would be these little tastes and times to check in. And it's just something to think about. Mm-hmm. I'm in a lot of transition, and so are a lot of you. But it's just something to think about. I appreciate all of you, the way you showed up today very much. Thank you. So I echo that. Thank you, Melody.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I was answering back to messages at the same time. Okay. All right. Well, again, and thank you guys for agreeing for this to be have been recorded. So thank you for that. And be on the lookout. There's going to be more of these coming. And since you know how I find my folks, if you know that you do something cool and you want to do it for the Alliance Endorsed community, just email me. No, I don't offer money. You just get the joy of being appreciated and having a wonderful community. So that's. But yeah, if you know something you want to share, hit me up. And I just saw a request in the chat, so I hear you. I'm writing it down, and I got another idea. So, all right.
We're gonna all go get back out there.
I know, right?
Thank
well,
you.
I'm not actually.
Good.
Amy,
Good for you.
Could you stay on for a second, Amy?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, everyone.